What up, meatheads? This is Travis, American Butcher, and this is the Meat Block Podcast. And like I say every intro when I usually mess up, just like I did, this is the podcast for butchers, by butchers. I mean, wow, I'm 0 for 2 with this intro, and you know what? I'm just going to keep rolling. What up, meatheads? This is Travis, American Butcher, and this is the Meat Block Podcast, the weekly podcast by butchers for everyone. I think that was much better. And before I roll the intro, and before I tell you what the topic is, I just want to ask that you recommend us to a friend, someone in the culinary world, someone who just may love meat, maybe that vegan asshole that you're friends with. So recommend us and review us on iTunes. And now time for the podcast.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. In his way, the meat cutter is an artist. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
Trade. T-R-A-D-E. Definition. Noun. A skilled job, typically one requiring manual skills and special training. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about the word butchery, but not in like the sense that we have in the past as far as what that means, but as in whether or not butchers, and whatever we defined that earlier in a previous episode, slaughterman, artisanal, all that. Whether if it's an art or a craft or a trade. And so the other evening I was FaceTiming with my friend Norm the butcher out there in San Francisco, good friend of the show, good friend of mine. We were talking about the idea or what craft butchery or artisan and skill, what's that mean? And it had to do, it was this wide topic about, America's standing in the international butchering community, and that essentially the mechanized food system that created, after World War II with the baby boomers, and then in the 60s and 70s, how supermarkets went from whole carcasses and quarter beef to subprimals to what looks like it's going to be, I wouldn't be surprised if it was prepackaged meats and things like that, so that as the slowly decline and the downfall of the corner butcher store and the butcher shop in America, the craft, the artisan, the know-how, the skills, quote unquote, I'm not trying to throw shade at anyone, went down as well. And it didn't seem that like that happened in other Western countries, I would say, where they still had more corner butcher shops. They still, I'm not dumb. I do realize that there are supermarkets, and there's even Costco's and in Europe and things like that. But it seemed like the change was delayed, and that their small, crafted, generations old shops are still around. Just look at Simon, who we've talked about on the show before, Simon the Butcher, who's a member of Team Great Britain for the WBC, that he is multiple generations deep in his trade, been in the industry since he was 13. And it's hard to find that in America unless it's small, family-owned custom shops or custom slaughter facilities. And in the mid-2000s, with the quote-unquote hipster craze with the mustaches and people buying their leather aprons and people wanting to get more involved in jobs that were hands-on, where you couldn't really tell if these people were going to be, go into butchery or be they got their look first before they got their career path. Like, are you going to be a butcher, a barber, a brewer with your leather apron and all that? And don't get me wrong that you got to dress the part. And one of my first jobs, I was 18 years old and I worked for a rough framing company. And it was super humbling and terrible. And what I did was I went out and bought all these tools. I was given a tool list: of framing hammer, framing square, bags, all this stuff. And before I showed up on my first day, I had my tool bags and I rubbed them in the dirt, dinged up my hammer because I didn't want to look like that guy with the brand new spanking tools and all that stuff. And now, honestly, I could give two shits less about that kind of insecurity, even though I'm super insecure in other senses. But looking the part certainly didn't make me any better at framing. Didn't make me a finished carpenter, where, having a drinking problem didn't make me a better construction worker. But what it helped was mentally make me feel accepted or whatever, that I just didn't stick out like a sore thumb. And I just get worried sometimes when I see people that they want to fill this role of this nostalgia purposes of being a butcher and longing for a time that they've never experienced and that they don't know. And false nostalgia's, kind of dangerous. But I don't think it is in this sense. I almost bought a Legends of the Hidden Temple card game because of nostalgia, and I can understand that. But having a longing for a time that you weren't really alive for is just kind of weird. But back to the earlier conversation that I was having with Norm about these boutique shops that, offer the apprenticeships, offer classes, and where you go in and it's the image first, and they also know how to make a beautiful case. But it's very much an image that you see, this nostalgia for a time that no one there has ever experienced. And what my fear of that is complacency in the skill set in America. That a lot of times when people do a paid apprenticeship at one of these shops or do a paid apprenticeship anywhere, they have the affordability to possibly relocate, to stay in a city that they're not from, or they also have the ability to not work for large portions of the day because they're doing this paid apprenticeship. And that could make the people coming out of these shops and situations, and that has the potential to create a lack of diversity and a lack of background and a lack of people to bring their own spin on this industry. And I know a lot of times when people do paid apprenticeships, and the reason shops do paid apprenticeships is because when you train someone and you take on a stage, or that they're really, by the time they get good, where you could rely on them, they're leaving to go to the next thing because the demand for skills like that is higher than the wage. A lot of these shops in high metropolitan areas where their rents are really high and their meat prices are very high and their margin isn't pushed. It's pushed onto the customer, certainly when you're paying, $16 for a pork chop, or $16 a pound, but the margin is also pushed onto that free stages, the apprenticeship program, and the low wages that these craft butchers are doing. A lot of times when people leave shops, that they just use it as another buzzword, a lot of culinary people to add to their resume. I can't tell you how many times I've met a chef who also tells me they're a butcher. And even though in our episode about definitions, yes, in that episode I agree that they can call themselves whatever, but it's also just like, come on, dude. Don't tell me that. Other conversations I've had with another good friend of mine is Brian Mayer, and I'm trying to get him to get on the show, but we've had missed windows. But luckily, we're going to be staying in the same hotel at the end of July, and I think I could get an interview out of him. Pretty excited about that. And we've talked before about apprenticeship programs he's run and the price point, and then a lot of the apprenticeships in people who moved on after his apprenticeship program go to open up their own shops, and they take on apprenticeships, but only with the knowledge that they got from Brian, when Brian is antiquating knowledge that he's got from all over the industry. And then that knowledge gets passed on, and it's like the game of telephone, or, the information gets diluted after a while. And my fear with this is having complacency or unfound arrogance in people who I would encourage to go and work in a back of the house, who I would encourage to go work at a processing facility. I think to be a true artist or in all that, to understand the carcass from all aspects of the industry. David's going to talk more about this subject.
Hey, meatheads. David here. So butchery, skilled labor or art that's functional? Mostly. I don't know. I think it's a polarizing subject, obviously, and I wanted to ask a couple people around me their thoughts. So I busted out the recorder at work. The first person I asked was Melanie. Melanie is our new meat cutter on our team. She's fast, efficient, hardworking, intelligent. It's awesome to have someone on our team like her. And I asked her thoughts. Here they are. Melanie, in your opinion, is butchery a traditional trade or an art?
I guess I would say it's both. I think it depends more on the person than just the industry itself. Mm-hmm. Personally, I would say more it's a trade, but I think anymore that a lot of people are getting into it because they like the artistic side of it. It's a really creative industry. Mm-hmm. But it's also an industry where you work hard, mm-hmm. and I think that's why it is a trade. But yeah, I would definitely say it's both.
You and I are definitely more on the tradesman end of things in a more commercial production setting. Does the idea of like artisanal butchery do anything for you? Do you like that side of it as well?
Yeah, I think it'd be a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, maybe sometime in the future.
I do enjoy the hardworking trade aspect of it, but
yeah,
it's fun to play around with different cuts and just do fun things like that. I always miss like making rolled roasts and stuff like that where you tie in butcher's knots.
Yeah.
That stuff kind of gets lost when you're doing trade work.
Agreed. Yeah, I miss that stuff too. Well, maybe we'll have to figure out a way to work that into our case sometime over the next year.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Next, I asked Ross. Ross is a former executive chef who has cooked on the West Coast and in the Midwest. He's from down south. He's bringing kind of a different perspective to the butchery thing. He wanted to have a career change and learn some new skills, and he's our new value-added guy. So here's Ross. Okay, here I've got Ross. Ross is a former longtime chef, has cooked from Midwest all the way to the West Coast, and now he's joined our team over here as a cold-blooded killer as well as our value-added specialist, more or less. So you're coming from a different background than a lot of people I'm going to ask this question to. So Ross, in your opinion, is butchery more of a trade or more of an art?
I feel butchery is an art. You have to be able to see the meat and the animal as more than just a bunch of lines. It's more than just an animal. It is actually a kind of a roadmap, a puzzle, if you will. And if you're not willing to be creative with that, you shouldn't really be in the, it's going to be work and a trade to you. It's not going to be art. Mm-hmm. I feel it's a little bit more of an art, a lot more of an art than what being a chef is. Being a chef is a lot of just day after day laboring stuff, and you get the random ideas and you get to experiment. But with actual butchery, it's a love, and there's a true art to it, because every animal's different. No matter who you get it from, every animal's different. As a chef, I can get an onion, and it's the same onion every time.
Sure.
Or a potato or something like that, but you've got different animals coming in all the time, and there's not the same map, and you have to really be an artist to be able to make your product the same every time with a different animal coming in each time.
That's a really interesting perspective. I like that. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Now, there's a couple of perspectives that I hadn't thought of. Those are some fresh takes on it. And I imagine if I talked to 50 other people, I'd probably have 50 other ideas about whether butchery is a skilled trade or an art. This is something I've thought about a fair amount during my career thus far, and I think I've kind of straddled the line, sometimes been one side of the spectrum, sometimes been at the other end, relative to the things that I wanted to be doing or learning at that time. There does seem to be a bit of a rift right now, though. It doesn't seem to be a balance in the world of butchery, in my opinion, as far as where the resumes are being sent. It reminds me kind of this term called conspicuous consumption. I was reading about this in regards to kind of the labor crisis and how there aren't a lot of tradespeople currently out there looking for work. There are more jobs than there are tradespeople. And this author was basically asserting that people are currently picking their jobs the way that they shop. It's a type of shopping called conspicuous consumption. It's where the consumer class buys expensive and artisanal products in order to display wealth, culture, intelligence, or ideals of some sort, rather than choosing products or services that meet their practical needs. In this article, written by Venkatesh Rao for theribbonfarm.com, the author asserts that we've, over the last 30 years or so, have more and more been practicing conspicuous production. Basically, more and more people are choosing jobs the way they choose products. They look for prestigious companies to work for, or even accept less money to work for somebody famous. Sometimes it's as simple as someone saying that they're doing what they love, which may actually be finding a job that allows the worker to fulfill that narrative that was created before learning the basics. One time I was working in a butcher shop, and someone that was totally new to the business, it was their very first day, and they came to work with an artisanally handcrafted leather apron and a vintage scabbard full of wood-handled repurposed knives, things like that. This person hadn't cut meat a day in their life, but clearly there was an image constructed beforehand. Now, it probably sounds like I'm being kind of scornful, but I don't really mean to be coming from that place. But perhaps this change in the younger generation's incentives for employment could have something to do with the huge drought of skilled trades workers out there, and the abundance of low-paying, entry-level artisanal jobs out there. I think it's a phenomenon especially present in the food production industry, really, from kitchens to butcher shops. Rarely does someone passionate about charcuterie or sausage making get their start with within a USDA high volume production facility or something like that, or like a cut and wrap, where entry pay is average. Training is definitely provided, though, and upward mobility is most likely capped. Instead, I think a lot more young workers choose a business with a well-curated image, maybe through marketing or social networking or something, with a low entry-level wage, slow training program, and a boom or bust sort of upward mobility, as if you were going to become the next celebrity. I think the false but perceived disparity between the two worlds robs the entire industry of potential talent, actually, and income in general, I think. So, obviously, I'm going to digress again and again, but what I'm really getting at is that I don't really think that butchery falls under the trade or an art or other of the categories. Rather, I think that artisans are a type of trade person, and the two styles are totally cooperative and even symbiotic in some ways. So when I was kind of brainstorming about what I thought could be some of the reasons for this cultural phenomenon of trades versus artisans, I was quickly reminded of my own adolescence, really. In high school, I was a pretty good student. I mostly got straight A's, some B's. I scored well on aptitude tests. And my teachers and parents were super clear about what I was going to do after high school. I was going to go to college, right? I was going to live up to my quote-unquote potential, go to university for engineering or something, get a job for a company, or become a teacher. Like I said, I had a good memory and I was a good intuitive test taker, but I had very little actual grasp of the things we were being taught in high school. I was a good student because I was a great test taker, ultimately. Learning for me is more of a hands-on thing. And what truly interested me was working with my hands. Instead of going to college immediately after high school, I wanted to enroll in the local technical vocational center. I toured it with some high school class, I don't know, some sort of seminar class or something. And I was really invigorated, actually. I was drawn to the automotive repair center, the electronics lab, and by far, more than everything else, I was really excited about the production kitchen. They had kind of a catering setup there and taught people how to produce for, commercial food production. I remember when I told my counselor at school that I wanted to take a few different vocational courses to see what clicked with me. She was not supportive whatsoever. And next thing I knew, I was in the office with her and my mom. Just as an aside, my mom was a lunch lady at my high school, which was awful 98% of the time. But 2% of the time, it was taco day, And while your average student was limited to going through the line one time with a maximum of 3 tacos, I got to go through unlimited. So that feels worth it to me. Anyways, I sat there with my mom and my counselor, and they basically used a bunch of scare tactics and to talk me out of wanting to go to vocational school. The message that was being sent to me was that vocational programs are for underachievers and losers, and you're not going to do that. And that shit really stuck with me, it's really stuck in my head, and it set me up for almost a decade of aimlessness, professionally, and unrealistic expectations, because I truly believed, before I actually stopped and thought about it, I truly believed that trade careers are for stupid people, and I should have a well-paying, challenging job requiring lots of schooling. And at the time, I had none of those things going on, so I figured that I was just never going to succeed at anything. So I just kind of traveled and played music and didn't do much at all. It wasn't until I hit a major turning point at one point that I was able to take what I considered to be a risk by doing what I actually wanted to do and getting into the food industry. But then I was still stuck with that feeling like, if you want to do this, then you have to go to school, become an artisan chef, become somebody who's doing something different and pushing the envelope, I kind of threw that to the wind, though, after I really sat down and challenged it and ended up getting a job as a dishwasher in a high-production, high-volume kitchen. And honestly, was probably the best decision I ever made. Why is this digression relevant? Well, I don't think that I was alone in this learned view of vocational trades. Everywhere in America, employers are hard up for help, especially in the skilled labor tradesman fields. According to the Associated General Contractors of America, more than 70% of construction-related companies nationwide cannot fill their open positions. And I think more than 50% of these open positions pay more than the average salary for the area. I think those figures are pretty consistent in our line of work, as a matter of fact, especially in small cut and wraps or even large plants. I've had to do a serious amount of hiring over the last 6 months or so, and it's been mind-blowing how difficult it's been to find people who want to show up every day, work a full 8-hour shift, and, learn something and do a good job. I've got people who show up for a couple hours, show up for one day, not show up at all. We pay better than the average entry-level position in the area. We pay pretty okay, and I can't get people to send me resumes. Yet 2 hours west, southeast, northwest, there are craft butcher shops that are just sifting through resumes to come, and sometimes they have people pay them to teach them. Personally, I believe social networking and other media sources have over-romanticized the craft meat sector, and I'm sure that I have just as much to do with that as anybody else. The image of a stereotypical craft butcher, it's a very attractive character, and it's something that inspired me when I was in my early 20s. But when I worked retail early on, I became super aware of the stereotypes around the industry. The retail meat cutters thought that processing plant work was for criminals and degenerates, and artisanal butchers were at the top of the food chain. Those are blanket statements and stereotypes that aren't totally true. I think what we were forgetting about is that, or not even considering, is that the two ends of the spectrum, the trades workers and the artisans, are two arms of the same organism, and they need one another. The craft sector needs the laborers because they supply the product to be turned into a meat art. There's no such thing as an artisanal slaughterhouse. Animals all die the same way, relatively speaking. And the production workers need the artisanal side of the business because constantly reinvented trends, buying trends and whatnot. They power buying trends all the way down the food chain. It trickles right down the economic ladder and hits us in the cut and wrap. Things that are happening in Food and Wine magazine and in Savour and Bon Appetit and in all of the really high-end craft steakhouses around America right now. That all makes their way 3, 4, 5 years down the line to cut and wraps out in the country. What I'd really like to see is some of the enthusiasm and curiosity from the craft business side make its way over to the industrial or production side of the business. I also think that high-end retail arena could use more people with a background in food safety, HACCP, and high-volume production. I think that some cross-experience could really do the business good. I highly, highly recommend that if you want to pursue a long-standing career in the meat business, focus on jobs that you want to go after, but maybe are slightly outside your comfort zone. Don't just focus on jobs that resemble the media that you admire or were inspired by. Remember, after all, the original artisans were just some sort of industry worker who became adept at their jobs, so adept that they were able to offer a service so unique that they could work for themselves. I'd really suggest that if you want to get into artisanal or specialty meat, go out there and get yourself a job at a local cut and wrap for 3 to 4 years. A place that maybe kills and cuts between 10 and 30 beef a week with as many hogs, and just really get into it and bring your enthusiasm and drive in that early part of your career to a place where you're going to get a great fundamental education in food safety, in relationships with farmers, producers, customers, seeing what the backbone of the country buys, not just the specialty niche high-end stuff, but really connect with the communities around you and see who's buying what. Because you'd be surprised how similar people are no matter what income bracket they fall into or what part of the country they live in. Everybody grew up in some small town somewhere or some small neighborhood, and everybody had things, when they, as a customer, the way that they approach buying meat, things that they bring from their childhood, and I think that being in a small cut and wrap in a more rural area or even, just not in a retail storefront, I think that you can really see a different side of the industry and really, I think you can really get a more well-rounded view of marketing techniques. I think you'll learn a lot about time management. I think you'll learn a lot about personnel management because you'll be getting all kinds of different people, not just young enthusiasts. I mean, I can think of kitchens that I've worked in where everybody was a 6-foot-tall white dude with a beard and a bunch of tattoos and a sick haircut. You know what I mean? If you branch out and get to these other places, you'll get to see what your industry means to a lot of different people. And I highly suggest it to anybody that's got the time or the willingness to drive, to cut their teeth in the trade and work on their skills until they naturally become an artisan, if their passion guides them in that direction.
So that made me think, this is Travis again, by the way. That I once saw this meme about butchery, and it said, something to the effect of, I've problem solved 100 things that you didn't even know were an issue before 10 o'clock. And it's just one of those arrogant things that you see. I have an arrogant sweatshirt that says 99% of people could do my skill or some dumb shit like that, which I do agree with. But I need to instill that false modesty. Joking. It's the tears of a clown. Anyway, and that problem solving meme is true. That whether you're working in a case like setting or in a cut and wrap, that one of my favorite things to do is to work with the consumer, get my cut sheet so it makes everybody happy, and also is cohesive and makes sense to me for when I'm going to cut it, that it's something that I didn't oversell. I know a lot of times working with the customer that it's like, oh, this person doesn't know, and this is impossible or this is dumb. But where an art comes in for that trade part of the industry is talking to your customer, and it's the gift of gab. It's where you got to put a little snake oil, rub it all over your body. And what you're going to do is walk them through a cut sheet that makes them think they're getting everything they want, while yet meeting your needs and not slowing you down as a cutter or as a person focusing on production. Innately, problem solving to this measure, I don't think is really considered a art, in the sense that artists don't look at a bunch of canvases and say, well, I need this much paint to go here, or I got this much clay, or I need to get this many sculptures out of this piece of marble. But if you're a stone worker versus a sculptor, or if you're a ceramics maker versus someone who works with clay, and if you're a house painter versus a artist, you would look at all those things as ways to push your margin by raw materials and how many jobs you could spread them out over a period of time. And you're not really worried about the creative aspect of your job, where you talk to a homeowner and they come in and say, like, well, you said you wanted it this color, but this was my interpretation of the color, and I hope you like it. Where Butchery has a lot of that, where you want to stuff your case with this and fill your orders that make everything look nice and still make the customer happy. Because even though a lot of things happen behind that case, and when I mean behind that case, I mean removed from that boutique shop. I mean the person who's possibly packing and breaking that subprimals to the people slaughtering. The first thing people are going to notice is that French lamb chop. And they're going to see that as the art and not the person who killed that animal, or the couple of hands or maybe a couple dozen hands that dealt with it on its way out of the slaughter facility into the packing house. The person who's going to get the credit besides the artisan butcher is going to be the farmer for creating a medium or canvas, if you will, that allows such beautiful end results to come out of this raw material. I remember when I was working in New England, and one of the big slaughter accounts was Together Foods, and we did a lot for this company, and to the point where I could walk into one of their stores and look at their product there in New England and say, there is a almost 100% certainty that I killed that animal. And seeing people with their aprons and their scabbards and their wood handle knives creating this beautiful casework, and I got jealous and wanted to be like, well actually, I shot this and killed it, and besides that being completely inappropriate on several fronts, I bit my tongue, didn't say anything, and compartmentalized my job and my role and focus in this industry, and realized that whatever task I was doing at that moment, I would do my best to be the best at it, learn everything I could from that position, talking to the old timers on the kill floor, the master butchers in the cut room, the guys who are generation deeps. And then when I eventually found myself in a retail artisan whole carcass buzzword role, taking all my previous experience and putting it into that situation. And it was met terribly. These other craft butchers and people were not welcome to the idea that they learned this certain way from this certain person and this is how they did things. And I went along with it. One thing I've learned that when people who work in the industry, like say you get a new guy at the office, first thing they're going to do is point out things that are wrong and say, this is how we did it at our other office. And then they may realize the reason things are done at this new facility is because they may have tried it that way and it didn't work, or with their personnel that it won't work that way, or their ordering or trainability. So not wanting to be the new guy to solve all their problems when they felt their problems didn't need to be solved. And then flash forward to years later and now, where one of my good friends was responsible for teaching my old bosses. And after talking to him and, being professional friends and then talking about the industry, that closed-mindedness is something that he would never teach. And that all goes back to my fear, or perpetuating my fear of a closed-minded front-of-the-house industry. This next piece is by Ryan.
Butchery is very much like the parable of the blind people and the elephant. A dozen or so blind people have surrounded an elephant, reaching with their hands to feel what it is they've surrounded. One person who's at the rear of the elephant is holding on to the tail, and they exclaim, "It's a rope. It is a rope. Most certainly, this is a rope." A person who's standing to the side of the elephant says, "It feels to me like a wall." Yeah, this is a wall. Another person who's feeling the leg says, "What are you guys talking about? This is some sort of tree." And the person at the trunk keeps quiet because the trunk does not resemble a wall or a rope or a tree, and they're quite confused by their comrades' interpretations. Meat workers and butchers find themselves in countless similar but different permutations of work experience. From job to job and from year to year, the character of one's work experience may only be slightly different, with a little bit more emphasis on volume here or added value there. In other cases, our jobs may look drastically different, such as when comparing game processing to work in the gut table at a large packing house, or when comparing being a grocery store meat wrapper to being a farm kill custom slaughterman. In a sense, we are all correct about the interpretations and conclusions we come to. Similar to the blind people in the parable, it is a rope, it is a wall, it is a tree. And yet there is often a bigger picture, a larger interpretation that is worth striving for. It's an elephant that the blind people are feeling. but it will take mutual collaboration and sharing of experiences to bring together the pieces of the puzzle necessary to reveal the elephant. This is what we at the Meat Block are attempting to do. Let's figure this thing out together. Whether my flavor of butchery has more in common with an art or with a trade, it is of no matter. Whether my butcher job is more similar to a factory worker, or more similar to an old world carpenter, or more similar to a chef, or a poet, or a hunter, or a talk therapist, it's still legit. We need all the permutations of butchery to exist. Even folks who have terrible knife skills and embarrassingly misinformed advices, by showcasing butchery and, quote-unquote, by teaching butchery, they may still be providing an unmistakably powerful and life-altering moment for their audiences. Although it might be fun to poo-poo these fake butchers, there's countless evidence across disciplines that people with very little technical skill can still affect powerful social change for the better. High-level chefs, for example, with very low levels of butchery prowess, can still create culture-altering ripples by showcasing even a mere gesture towards butchery. My Little League baseball coaches, looking back, they were not very good at baseball at all, but I did not know that at the time. To me, they were gods. They provided me with an experience that captured my imagination and my animal instincts, and they welcomed me into the fold that was the rich world of baseball and sport. There is value here. Even if, after some time, it became clear that I must unlearn the habits my early mentors taught me, I'm still grateful for the impact they had on me at the mind level. For it is that mind level and that heart connection with the craft that will carry me to a place of true, authentic discernment and true relationship. It does not matter to me whether I make a lot of money or a little money in this butchery work. It does not matter to me if, in 50 years, this work becomes obsolete. If this work of dressing out animals, of carcass breaking, and cutting meat becomes a thing of the past. If meat industry jobs are taken over by sophisticated robots, for that matter, if all human jobs are taken over by robots, and we are no longer required to work for money at all, then in that scenario, in order to live fulfilling lives, humanity will need to do those things and perform those activities from which we derive purpose and meaning. For me, the landscape of butchery is the work that I would choose to do anyway. It is a work that captures my instincts and my imaginations. It is personal and compelling to me. I do this work even though I receive very few accolades or acknowledgement for it. I receive a meager salary. When I say I do slaughter work, most often this is met with apprehension by most of society. Confusion even. My coworkers begrudgingly, once in a blue moon, might offer a statement like, "You're improving." Never a true compliment. There are no adoring fans, and this is all totally fine with me. For me, there is the satisfaction that I have found a work that I can immerse myself in. A work that captures my attention, captures my instincts and my imaginations, and a work that I would choose to do anyway. Even if/when society's need for knife-in-hand butchers has waned. recently, I read a book by Jack London, The Call of the Wild. I read this book to my kids. I very much like reading to my kids before bed. And especially I like finding books to read that all of us enjoy. The Call of the Wild is a book about sled dogs and sled dog life in the Northern Territories during the gold rush of the 1800s. More specifically, it is about one dog named Buck, a domestic collie mutt that lived a comfortable life in his human family in California until being kidnapped, broken, and sold into the slavery of a life in the traces. A life of pulling sled with a team of other dogs, mostly husky dogs. Buck was an anomaly in that he was not born into this life. It was foisted upon him. And unlike the mostly husky breed genetics that permeated the pulling teams he found himself on, his genetics were not as well adapted to the harsh weather and landscape. Yet, as the story unfolds, some innate memory is awakened in Buck. Something from far back in his canine lineage begins to come alive. And against all odds, he begins to thrive. He finds the pure joy and the meaning and the purpose that is at the heart of a sled dog, of a life in the traces, as they say. I could not help drawing parallels to my relationship with meat cutting. Though my experiences are not nearly as epic and legendary as Buck's would become through the course of the novel, there's an aspect of Buck's journey that I connected with. From here, I'll read a few quotes from that book. Here's a quote about Buck beginning to come alive and thrive as a sled dog. There is an ecstasy that marks the summit of life, and beyond which life cannot arise. And such is the paradox of living. This ecstasy comes when one is most alive, and it comes as a complete forgetfulness that one is alive. This ecstasy, this forgetfulness of living, comes to the artist caught up and out of himself in a sheet of flame. It comes to the soldier, war-mad on a stricken field in a refusing quarter. And it came to Buck, leading the pack, sounding the old wolf cry, straining after the food that was alive and that fled swiftly before him through the moonlight. He was sounding the deeps of his nature and the parts of his nature that were deeper than he, going back into the womb of time. He was mastered by the sheer surging of life, the tidal wave of being, the perfect joy of each separate muscle, joint, and sinew, and that it was everything that was not death, that it was aglow and rampant, expressing itself in movement, flying exultantly under the stars and over the face of dead matter that did not move. Wow, that was a big quote. Here's a quote about Buck having to fight his way through the pecking order and establish himself in this competitive world of sled dogs. Quote, "In this manner, he had fought forgotten ancestors. They quickened the old life within him, the old tricks which they had stamped into the heredity of the breed were his tricks. And when, on the still cold nights, he pointed his nose at a star and howled long and wolf-like, it was his ancestors, dead in dust, pointing nose at star and howling down through the centuries and through him." There's this phenomenon of pride that the sled dogs possessed. Buck describes meeting these sled dogs in camp and looking, kind of observing their personalities, and some of them were kind of just strange and listless and couldn't put his finger on who they were exactly. But then once they were in the traces and harnessed up to the sled and pulling, they would come alive, completely alive, and their whole personalities would transform into this whole other creature. And there's this great pride and joy and dedication that these sled dogs felt towards their work. One of the quotes says, "For the pride of the trace and trail was his, and sick unto death, he could not bear that another dog should do his work." There's this thing where, like, when the sled dogs would get sick, like, they would still rather be in the traces. And there's one dog that had an internal bleeding, some sort of internal injury, and was going to die. But here's the quote: "He pleaded with his eyes to remain there when the drivers tried to take him out of the harnesses. The driver was perplexed. His comrades talked of how a dog could break its heart through being denied the work that killed it, and recalled instances they had known where dogs too old for the toil or injured had died because they were cut out of the traces altogether. Also, they had it a mercy, since Dave was to die anyway, that he should die in the traces, heart easy and heart content. So he was harnessed in again, and proudly he pulled as of old, though more than once he cried out involuntarily from the bite of his inward hurt. Several times he fell down and was dragged in the traces, and once the sled ran upon him so that he limped thereafter in one of his hind legs." End quote. And then that dog named Dave died shortly after. But
in conclusion, because I want to wrap this up in a nice, beautiful trust package for the listener, I feel like David's takeaway was that don't let this polarize you, that this is a polarizing topic. And I think I got into that as well. And what I take away from Ryan is, call it whatever, but as long as you're happy and you're properly driven, that's what's important. Also, what I took away from Ryan as the person who was grabbing the trunk of the elephant was thinking he was grabbing a dick. All right, meatheads, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Meat Block Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you just think about it. What is it? An art? Is it a craft? Let us know. Is it a trade? And the way you can let us know is by emailing us at themeatblockpodcast@gmail.com. You can tweet us at themeatblockpod, Instagram at themeatblock, and Facebook at themeatblock. And also, let us know on iTunes when you leave that review in your 5 stars. And if you're looking for a way to get a hold of Ryan, he is at Gather and Break on Instagram. David is at A Farm Butcher on Instagram. And I am at American Butcher on Instagram and Facebook. This week's meathead is Basic Butch. And if you want to be the meathead of the week, just use the hashtag #TheMeatBlock and tag us on social media and tag friends if you think you know someone who will enjoy this show. And until next time, keep your knives sharp and live in the margin. This outro song is Taylor Chowder, Nose to the Grindstone.
Daddy worked like a mule mining Pike County coal. He fucked up his back, couldn't work anymore. He said, one of these days you'll get out of these hills. Keep your nose on the grindstone and out of the pills. See, the ways of this world just bring you to tears. Keep the Lord in your heart and you'll have nothing to fear. Live the best that you can. And don't lie and don't steal. Keep your nose on the grindstone and out of the pills. Well, Daddy, I've been trying, I just can't catch a break. There's too much in this world I can't seem to shake. But I remember your words, Lord, that bring me to chills. Keep your nose on the grindstone and out of the pills. Keep in mind that a man's just as good as his word. It takes twice as long to build bridges you've burnt. And there's hurt you can cause, time alone cannot heal. Keep your nose on the grindstone and out of the pills. Well, Daddy, I've been trying, I just can't catch a break. There's too much in this world I can't seem to shake. But I remember your words, Lord, they bring me to chills. Keep your nose on the grindstone and out of the pills. Keep your nose on the grindstone